Resident Evil Revelations is one of, if not the most underrated RE game in my opinion. There's never been a doubt in my mind over the simple fact of the overall design and setting of this game that it hits harder than I'd say a lot of other horror games I've played, and I don't even think it's really that scary. I say this with all in mind with the fact that this was just a 3DS game for God's sakes, but even with that, it still looks gorgeous. That being said though, every time I run through this game, it's always bothered me with one little thing, for whatever reason. So much about this game feels a little off, and a lot of that is due to the nature of feeling low budget and back to its Resident Evil cheesiness. That's fine and all, and considering it is a 3DS spin-off, it definitely has its fair share of problems. But the thing that always gets to me in this game is the mere concept of it. Every Resident Evil game is different, and there's no question about the franchise holding its own variety, something I love so dearly about the series as a whole, especially when they could all honestly stand on their own, despite the major connections throughout them all. But the idea of being on a cruise ship in the middle of nowhere with some of the coolest areas found inside a Resident Evil game, alongside its wacky plot involving Jill and Chris between the events of Resident Evil 4 and 5, alongside teasing 5's Lost in Nightmares DLC for timeline's sakes, there's a lot. It was always cool to see the inclusion of events between games, and that's exactly where the Revelations games fit in. They're supposed to be sidelined, telling their own stories, branching between the games without affecting them, despite the connections they'll obviously add to the Prime canon. Before I talk more into this, it's always bothered me that the spin-off games in Resident Evil somehow don't matter as much as the mainline numbered titles for whatever reason. There's been arguments as to whether or not the Revelations games have been considered as mainline or not, and the same can especially go for Code Veronica, something I'd argue to the death about, due to how much involvement it has within the main storyline. But as a lot of things Resident Evil, Capcom has been very vague about mainline stuff. But as far as we have at the moment, the only Resident Evil games from the past that have already been remade are only the first 4 games, completely ignoring Code Veronica, Zero, and even past the first remake again. But to what point will they stop remaking the numbered titles and start thinking about the spin-off games? Well, there isn't too much evidence to really say, but I'd say that it's definitely a possibility. Resident Evil is a giant franchise, and there's certainly a lot to offer within it, ranging from continuing on the numbered titles and remakes and spin-offs and even movies taking place within the main continuity as well. It just bothers me that there's certain games like Revelations that they'd likely go past, and the reason for that is because Revelations serves mainly as a spin-off, and why go there when there's so many other important games that happened beforehand? Now, why am I making this video then? Because I think Resident Evil Revelations remake would be sick. I've been the only one as far as I'm aware that has been pushing for this, and sure, it is a strange thing to go for since there's so many other Resident Evil games that are so much better. There's been several arguments in the past from other fans like, why would they remake a game no one cares about over a game everyone loved? And I'd say, well, you're not wrong. Obviously a game like Resident Evil 4 is obviously going to get more recognition and excitement over it compared to something like Resident Evil Survivor getting a remake. There's no question about it. But I don't think for a second that means that just because they're remaking a bad game automatically sets the game to just fail. Some games may not seem like they need overcorrecting, or maybe they're just so bad nobody wants to talk about it anymore. But this is Resident Evil. The remakes of these games change things. In fact, a lot of things, whether they're good or bad. Changing or adding to a game that wasn't well appreciated could do a lot in the long run, so why not? Also, if there can't be a new game called Resident Evil Revelations merely just because the original is somehow not as good as the others or gives a bad rep, then what's the point of having new games in general? It just needs to be introduced as Resident Evil's next game and people will get excited over that. We don't need to have remakes over masterpieces in order to create more motion for people to come over and buy the game. A lot of the average consumers, when they see a game like this, they'd be interested based on what is shown in front of them. Just as much as something like Silent Hill F might not exactly be continuing off some other storyline, nor is it even taking place in Silent Hill's main town. It might as well even be considered a spin-off, but people don't care. They're interested in it because it looks intriguing. A Revelations remake can have an impact regardless of whether people remember the original being bland or whatever. The point I'm so desperately making is that it doesn't matter as much as a lot of people argue it to be. It's gonna make money if people just talk about it, and it will 100% be talked about considering how big this franchise has become over the years. With that being said, what really makes the game deserving of one in my opinion? Well, I've already mentioned the concepts of it being one of the most interesting, aside from maybe its plot, which can definitely be worked around in a remake. Not that it's bad or anything, but they could definitely put in some more work for it. One of the best parts about the game is the beginning section, where you enter inside the boat for the first time, and it emits much darker hallways, something that would be perfect for horror in a remake. I feel like one of 7's biggest problems was its cruise ship sections, for issues that aren't exactly aligned with the boat itself, as it just stretches on too long and suffers from the flashbacks too, just a bit of a downgrade compared to the rest of the game. But one of the best parts of it was that to a lot of people it was still scary. The idea of an abandoned cruise ship, let alone being lost at sea in Revelations, is the perfect place for horror. The remakes, if anything, add an extra layer to it, and considering there's actually a lot of people who are genuinely scared of cruise ships in real life, I personally think it'd be great to focus on. Then we get on to the main point about this game in its entirety that I've fallen in love with, and that's the ooze. The ooze were a brand new and really only a one-time thing that were mutated humans after contracting the T-Abyss, which dealt with actual fish's genes from the ocean with the human genome, which has always been the coolest virus in the franchise in my opinion. I mean, all of these creatures genuinely look so cool. It felt so different from the average zombies, or action zombies that were going on for a long while. But this time you're literally fighting for your life against the creepiest looking mutated fish monsters while lost at sea. The story, as I've mentioned already, definitely could have some great work put into it in a remake, as again, it isn't that great. It has an interesting premise, and the cutscenes look alright, but a remake would also be great to improve upon. Also, the game, at least compared to the second Revelations game, I'd argue has a much closer resemblance to the original Resident Evil game's survival horror aspects to it in terms of its inventory and overall gameplay mechanics given the area it takes place in. Not that it's all like the older games, which I mean, really is kind of what Resident Evil usually is, but my point is that considering how Resident Evil 2's and 3's remakes operate in their form, I think a Revelations remake would look perfect in the new engine. Not to mention, I just love Jill's outfit in this game, and I'd love to be running around in it for a remake. I mean, there's so much I could really get into for this game, but honestly, if you haven't already, I'd say go into it and have a look for yourself. Play the game through every section and cutscene, and then start imagining what it would look like in a remake form. Then maybe you'd get what I mean. Now, obviously, would I rather have them remake the prior games like Code Veronica, 0, or even 5 to be remade first? Sure. But personally, I think it would be a massive missed opportunity for them to skip out on this one, especially if they're gonna end up remaking 6. With that being said, RE9 is just around the corner, alongside a brand new mobile game? Oh god. Well, anyway, I hope you're excited for them as much as I am. Please leave a like and subscribe while you're at it, as it certainly helps out the channel. I'd also love to hear opinions on this take and how others feel about it, as I'd love to read them. With that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.